but it's helping people see an authentic Jesus, the same type of Jesus that I know and love.
All of those emotions of feeling insecure, all of the experiences from my past, like all of those heavy things that was keeping me in one place came flooding out of me.
Inevitably, it's not until I'm there, the blood, sweat, and tears, seeing really what they're doing, hearing the real life stories from people, that's when the song comes.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Profiles. I'm Brian Howard. We're here at the LDS Motion Picture Studio in Provo, Utah, and joining me today is Brigitte Madrian. So glad to meet you and to have you here.
Thank you.
We've met once before. You came up to BYU, Idaho, but I was in a bigger group and I was able to hear you speak, and you had a lot of great things to say. And so I'm so glad you were able to make some time to come and visit with us now. We're down here in Provo, a little bit shorter trip for you than going up to Rexburg. So it's good to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me to be here today.
Well, official title, if I have to write it down so I get it right, Dean and Marriott Distinguished Professor in the Brigham University Marriott School of Business. That sounds a real mouthful. That's pretty cool. As I understand it, the first female dean of the Marriott Business School. That's a pretty cool accomplishment.
Yeah, it is a cool accomplishment. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, before coming to BYU, you were on the faculty at Harvard, and you did school there, and known really as an outstanding educator and researcher. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Coming to BYU, as we were talking before, your dad taught here at BYU, which was new to me. That would have been a fun experience. Did you know kind of what you wanted to do once you started college? Did you kind of have a plan in place, or were you figuring it out as you went?
Yeah, I was a little bit of an unusual child, so I can remember the moment in time when I was sitting in my 8th grade math class and I decided I was going to get a PhD.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted to be a professor like my dad. And I didn't know what I was going to study, but I decided that's what I wanted to do. And the blessing of having made that decision at the age of 13 was I had a lot of focus going forward. And then when I started BYU as a freshman a few years later, I thought I was going to major in political science, and I took an introductory economics class because the political science department recommended that for the poli-sci major, and I fell in love with economics. So I knew from fall semester of my freshman year that I was going to major in economics, get a PhD in economics, and then hopefully become a professor like my dad.
Wow, a lot of students would be very jealous at that, because some of us took us a long time to figure out what we wanted to do. Economics, now I don't know the numbers now, but it seems traditionally it's more males than females. Is that still the case?
Yes, that's still the case. That was certainly the case when I was an undergraduate at BYU 30-something plus years ago. And it's still true today, not just at BYU, but nationally. Do
you have any reason why that is? It just seems to trend one way or the other. Is it any particular reasons for that you can think of?
I think it's a puzzle that many of us in the profession are still trying to figure out. I think economics is a great thing to study for both men and women, and I don't know any unemployed economists. And it's a good skill set, even if you don't want to work and have a career. So it's a little bit of a puzzle.
Well, for some of us, it just scares us anyway, no matter male or female, because there's numbers involved, which always scares a few of us. But tell me about that decision to go into economics, and what did you think? You wanted to be a professor. Was it going to be a professor of economics at that point then? Is that what you wanted to do?
Yeah. Wanted to be a professor of economics. I really liked economics because economics uses a lot of analytical thinking, and I liked the analytical thinking, and the introductory economics class didn't use very much math, and I liked the idea that it didn't use very much math. And then once I got to my PhD program, I discovered that, it actually uses a lot of math. That wasn't a good reason to go into economics, but I've always liked the structured thinking that comes from economic models.
What went into your decision of where to go to get your PhD?
Well, that was easy. So I got my PhD at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. Yeah. And at the time, MIT was the top-ranked PhD program in economics in the world. So. Wow. Conditional on getting in, that's what most students who wanted to study economics would have done at the time. That was
the place. I was reading, you talked to somebody about this earlier, and that you went through a cohort that had actually quite a few women in it, and that was kind of a blessing. It was a good experience for you.
Yeah, it was really unusual. So typically at the time I was going to graduate school, there might be 2 or 3 women in a class of about 30 students. And the year that I matriculated, it was a slightly bigger class than normal. There were about 35 or 36 of us, and about 15 of us were women. So there was a really big cohort. I don't think there's been a cohort that size since then. So it was really unusual, and I consider it a great blessing to have had lots of fantastic female colleagues, but also lots of fantastic male colleagues when I was going through graduate school.
Are those people that you can still keep in touch with, that you made connections with?
Yeah, there are some of them. I've got a couple of really good friends. We were in study groups together at graduate school. They're now both on the faculty at the Yale School of Management, and there was one student who was a year behind me, and we ended up as assistant professors at Harvard right after graduate school. And I left a year after he came, and then a few years later we reconnected, and we've now been authoring papers together for over 20 years. We've probably written 3 or 4 dozen papers together. So there are quite a few people that I keep in touch with from my graduate school days.
How was the MIT experience? It sounds like, obviously for economics, it was the place to be, but how was the experience of being there as a student?
For me, MIT was a great place to be a graduate student. One of the interesting things about studying economics at MIT is undergraduates are typically going to MIT to study something, more related to science, computer science, engineering, things like that. So they don't have a really big undergraduate program in economics, which is different from a lot of other universities where they have, pretty large undergraduate economics programs. What that meant was the faculty had a lot more time to devote to the PhD students because they didn't have so many undergraduate students to deal with. So we got lots of attention. It was a really supportive program. Not all PhD programs are really supportive. They had really high standards, they had high expectations, and they let in the best students in the world, and it was just a great place to study and learn and make friends, and I have absolutely no regrets. It was a transformational experience in my life.
Sounds awesome. So you knew you wanted to go into academia, so you graduate. Did you have a particular place in mind? You ended up being at Harvard and some other places after that.
Yeah.
What was your plan?
My plan was to come back to BYU.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was going to graduate from BYU, go to MIT, get my PhD in 4 years, and then move back west and be the first female professor in the economics department at BYU. And then I got sidetracked for 30 years.
So how did you end up, Harvard was the first stop, right? And then subsequently, I think University of Pennsylvania and one other place in there that I can't remember.
University of Chicago.
University of Chicago.
And then University of Pennsylvania, and then back to Harvard.
Back to Harvard. So how did it work out? That first job in academia has got to be both a little trepidation and exciting. Yeah,
so there's this, if you're in graduate school, there's this thing that they call the job market. It's very formal in an academic setting.
Yes.
And, there's a pretty short window of time, and graduate students go out and interview with different universities, and then job offers come in, and you never quite know what's going to happen. And I was lucky. I ended up getting a few good options to choose from. I did get an offer from BYU, but I also got an offer from the Harvard University Economics Department. And that was hard to turn down. My husband had a job in Boston. So we, if I took that job, we didn't have to relocate. Plus, it was Harvard.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking that job. And it ended up not being as exciting as I thought it would be. I started that job right around the time that Bill Clinton was elected president, and a number of the faculty who were working in areas similar to mine were big supporters of Bill Clinton, and they ended up moving down to Washington and taking short-term positions in the Clinton administration. So the people that I'd gone to Harvard to be around and learn from and work with, they all left. And that was a little bit disappointing, a little bit frustrating. But another school I had an offer from was the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. And I had turned that down initially to go to Harvard, but 2 years later, they extended another offer, and a good friend of mine had gone there, and she really loved it. She said, I think you'll be really happy here. Why don't you come here? And initially, when I was on the job market the first time, one of the reasons I wasn't interested in the University of Chicago was because it was a business school. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be at a business school, but she gave it such glowing recommendations, and I decided to go and try it. And that was a really important career move because lo and behold, 2 decades later, now I'm the dean of a business school. And I don't think I'd be where I am now if I hadn't had those 8 years at the University of Chicago.
Yeah. So, and then you ended up going to Pennsylvania. Any particular reason for the job moves, your interest in research, or why would you go to the other places?
So I was at Chicago for 8 years, and it was a great place to learn. It wasn't a really great fit for me in terms of my academic interests. And Chicago's a big city. I had a long commute. My husband had a long commute. And so the University of Pennsylvania reached out, and so I ended up going to the Wharton School, which is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania. But one of the interesting things about the Wharton School is they had a department of business and public policy. And my interests have always kind of overlapped business and public policy. So my research, almost all of it, has had implications for the business world and for companies and how they do business. But the way I think about the questions that I do research is always from a public policy standpoint. You know, how would this help us inform how to make the world a better place? So this department that had a public policy focus in a business school seemed like a really natural fit. I just started doing research on retirement savings and employer-sponsored 401k plans, and one of the nation's or the world's leading experts was at the University of Pennsylvania. So it was a good opportunity to go learn from her. It was a short stay there. I was only there for 3 years, and then the Harvard Kennedy School made me an offer, and my husband and I had loved living in Boston when we were in graduate school. So when they reached out with an opportunity to move back to Boston, but a different part of the university at Harvard, that was really attractive. At the time, my husband had been working as a consultant for about 10 years, so he was on the road a lot, and we knew if we moved to Boston, he could get a job that wouldn't involve travel. So we decided to move back to Boston, and I kind of got the best of both worlds with that job as well. I was in a public policy school, but right about when I got there, they started a joint degree program between the business school and the Kennedy School of Government, the public policy school. And so I ended up teaching for several years in that particular program and was teaching students who were interested in both public policy and business, which was kind of really well aligned with what my interests were. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your research, because one thing that I find interesting is it's very applicable in a lot of things you've done, like with the auto for your 401k, for example, to be auto-enrolled as opposed to enrolling yourself. And it has a big change. In fact, most of us who are auto-enrolled in a 401k could probably thank you, because your policy, your research helped impact that. Tell us a little bit about that research, and how does it feel actually to have actually public policy changed based on some of the stuff that you do?
Yeah, so about 2 decades ago, I kind of serendipitously was connected with a company, and they wanted someone to come in and analyze their 401k plan with formal regression techniques, if that means anything to anyone. And I knew how to do that, and I knew enough about the type of research that had been done on retirement savings up to that point in time to know that there was probably some low-hanging fruit in the research world, because almost nothing had been done with company-level data. All the research up to that time had been done with survey data, and we know that individuals don't always give accurate responses to surveys. So I ended up working with this company, and they turned out to be one of the very first companies in the US to have adopted automatic enrollment, and no one had ever studied that. So so people know what I mean, automatic enrollment is the idea that the company automatically puts you into the savings plan. If you don't want to save, you can opt out, but if you don't do anything, they'll put you in the savings plan. And prior to the mid-2000s, the norm was that most companies, if they had a retirement plan, they would just make it available to you. And if you wanted to participate, you had to actively sign up. So when I was studying the data of this company, what I discovered was the fraction of employees in the savings plan went up by 50 percentage points
Wow.
when they moved from you have to opt in to participate in the plan to automatic enrollment. You have to opt out if you don't want to participate in the plan. And that research quickly gained a lot of traction amongst the companies that administer 401k plans in the US, because they want to get people to save more money, because then they have more assets to manage and more employees, more employees to help. So they quickly got very excited about that. There were a couple of employees working for the federal government in Washington who quickly got excited about it as a way to help people be more prepared for retirement. And so the exciting thing was my first paper was on that topic was published in 2001, and by 2006, just 5 years later, the U.S. had passed a major piece of pension reform legislation encouraging employers to adopt automatic enrollment. A few years after that, the U.K. passed a major piece of pension reform legislation requiring employers to use automatic enrollment. And the fraction of companies in the U.S. using automatic enrollment, in the early 2000s, it would have been less than 5%, and now it's probably over 60% of companies using it. And it's really exciting to do research cool. and to see that it has an impact on, in this case, on company policies in designing their retirement savings plan, and then by extension, have an impact on people's lives, in this case, helping them be more financially prepared.
Yeah, when you came to BYU, you talked about this, and I think this falls under the choice architecture, right, where you do the auto-enroll, and just by doing that, then I have to act to stop it, and it's just probably easier, but oftentimes it's to my benefit, right? Let's talk about more of that choice architecture, and how does that fit into some other areas of your research?
Yeah, so automatic enrollment is an example of choice architecture, which is how the decision environment in which we make choices are designed. So just like you can design a building and you have to decide where do you put the windows and the doors and the hallways and the conference rooms, things like that. When we ask people to make decisions, we can kind of design an architecture around those decisions. So automatic enrollment would be an example of, well, what is the default option in a choice setting? In some contexts, you might be able to get away from having a default option completely, but in other contexts, you kind of have to specify default. Another example of choice architecture would be, how many things do you have to choose from? So I think we've all had the experience of going to a restaurant and they have a menu that fits on one page, maybe a fancy restaurant, and they only have 5 or 6 things you can choose from on the menu. And then at the other extreme, you go to the diner and they've got a 20-page menu with 400 things you can choose from. So how many things do you have? How many things do you have to choose from? How are they ordered? So we know that people, when they face a long list, they give more attention to the things at the top of the list and to the things at the bottom of the list. So what order you put things in would be an example of choice architecture. Another example would be, when do you ask people to make the decision? So if you go to a restaurant, you're choosing when to make the decision of what to order on a menu. But in other times, someone else might have some influence. So, Election Day is on the second Tuesday in November. So that's an element of choice architecture. When are we asking people to go vote? When are we asking people to fill out their taxes? Things like that. So those are all different facets of what we would call choice architecture.
Like a deadline or something like that, also part of that.
Yeah, do you have a deadline or not? Do you not have a deadline? Deadlines are really effective getting people to make choices.
Older people remember I had the negative option for the record of the month club. So if I didn't send it in, it came to me automatically. So I have a lot of records I didn't really want. That's the way that happens. Well, that's really fascinating. I did want to ask you in our last couple of minutes, now at the Marriott School of Business, what are some of your goals or your vision now that you're there of what you want to accomplish and what do you hope for the school?
Boy, that is a great question. First of all, I just want to say I love my job. For me, being being able to come back to BYU as the dean of the Marriott School has been a really rich and wonderful blessing in my life. And the thing that makes it so wonderful is that I have the opportunity to influence the lives of, the thousands of students who study at BYU Marriott. So my primary goal is to help the Marriott School achieve the mission of BYU, which is to help prepare our students for exaltation and eternal life. But we're doing that by trying to provide a high quality business education, and some of the initiatives I'm really excited about are we're growing the size of our undergraduate student population. So in the 2.5 years that I've been there, we've increased the number of undergraduates majoring in business by about 15%. And we're hiring more faculty, and that's an exciting thing for a dean to be able to manage and be a part of. I'm really passionate about making sure that we have an environment that is inclusive and welcoming, where people feel like we want them to be there and that they can succeed in accomplishing their personal and professional goals. And I say that both for the students who are studying there, but also for the faculty, and staff who are there. So those are a couple of things that get me excited when I get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. I would think that as you discuss with students, then they probably have some, common questions for you about, work-life balance always comes up. What kind of response do you give when students ask, I want to do this, but I also want my career and my family? What kind of things do you share with them?
For me, I think the important lesson is that any choice you make is going to involve making sacrifices. There is no choice in which you get to have everything. Yeah. So you're going to be making sacrifices about what am I willing to give up for the things that are most important to me. So I think you want to be intentional about recognizing that, and then don't look back on the things that you've chosen to give up. In my case, I decided it was really important for me to have a career, and it was really important to me to have a family and to stay active in the church. And there were lots of things I was willing to give up to make those things happen. So as soon as we had kids, I gave up my book group. I gave up my monthly ladies movie group. I gave up reading the newspapers on Sundays. I gave up a whole bunch of things. And, those were things that were fun and meaningful and important to me, but they weren't important as the things that I really wanted to focus on. But, other people are going to make different decisions, and they're going to give up other things. So I've got a lot of friends who are women who decided that they wanted to stay home and raise their kids, and they gave up their career aspirations. I don't want to judge who's making the bigger sacrifice, but any decision you make involves making a sacrifice. So you and the Lord, you choose what's most important for you, and then kind of just be confident in your choice, and don't spend a lot of time looking back on the things that you gave up. Spend your time focusing on the things that you chose and that you get to spend your time and energy on because they're important to you.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's really great advice. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Dean of the Marriott School of Business, Brigitte Madrian, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
You're welcome.